I'll hold the board to the envelope. You may now take it away.
Good morning, folks. My name is Tom Keller. I work as a wildlife biologist in the game bird section, and that's with pheasants and quail primarily. So quail, and what we're doing today is we're going to celebrate a partnership for quail restoration in Pennsylvania, and also talk about the importance of partnerships in wildlife management, particularly in times when budgets are tight, and how far these partnerships can go. We've had quail here in Pennsylvania long before we were here. There's a lot of prehistoric evidence of quail in Pennsylvania. And quail really boomed in the late 1700s, early 1800s as land was cleared, settlers came in. And then what we saw was start to tail off in the 1900s. And so we went from having quail in every county in Pennsylvania to a really big range constriction down into the southern counties, southeastern counties. And up until that 21st century, when basically quail just slipped out the back door, and we just didn't, there was something missing in that early morning. You didn't hear that bobwhite whistle anymore. So thanks to a very forward-thinking board of commissioners and executive office, we were charged with creating a management plan for quail restoration in Pennsylvania, and that plan has run from 2011 through 2020. And so that has helped us come up with a plan to guide restoration throughout that time period and into the future. But part of that plan was to come up with partners, willing partners that were going to be willing to help us get quail habitat on the ground first, and then get quail to bring back this important native species. So what we did there is we looked for some of the historic strongholds of quail throughout Pennsylvania. We also looked at places where we had quail last, where some of our last sightings were, and where some of our populations kind of winked out over time. And we kind of put together a list. A lot of those were public landowners, and Letterkenny continued to come to the top. So Letterkenny Army Depot just kept being that spot where one of the last places we had quail in Pennsylvania. Franklin County was one of those places we had strong populations in through the 1800s, early 1900s. So at this time, I'd like to invite up the acting director of the Public Works for Letterkenny, Bill Tarman, and I'm going to give you a little more background on Letterkenny. So for those of you who don't know, Letterkenny Army Depot is down in Franklin County near Chambersburg area. It was constructed in 1942 as we began to ramp up for World War II. And it's a munitions storage facility. And Letterkenny has served our country proudly from World War II up through every major conflict to date, as well as within the peacetime that we've had between those conflicts. But it's not just that dedication to service of country, but it's also dedication to service to our wildlife resource. And so when you go to Letterkenny, it's one of those last gems in Pennsylvania where you can go in, and in a morning, driving around, you can see bear and bobcat, wild turkeys everywhere, dick sisal, spotted turtles, just in a huge diversity of plant species. It's an amazing place. But it's the quail, and that's kind of what had drawn us there to begin with. And so when we kind of approached them about it, we had worked very closely with them historically to do other research. So we've done some waterfowl research there, some wild turkey research, things like that. We approached them, we thought, well, this could be a hard sell, until we found out in their integrated natural resources management plan, they had quail restoration as an objective. So I thought, well, that's fantastic. Here's a way that we can partner to both meet objectives for our own agencies. And so we began this partnership, began a relationship, and we built that up over time. And just recently signed a 10-year MOU for specifically quail restoration in Letterkenny. And we also created a management plan to guide that MOU and to guide restoration efforts through time. And then just to date, we've actually got prescribed fire on the ground there for the first time ever. Through that partnership, did about 120 acres of warm season grass burning there to restore that, as well as about 28 acres of tree removal so far to restore quail habitat within the focus area. And so we invited Commissioner Putnam to present this print. Unfortunately, we're going to be losing Commissioner Putnam, but he has been a champion of bobwhite quail and wild pheasant restoration in this state. And we're very fortunate to have had him throughout this time and to really get the boots on the ground and get things running, as well as to have a commission that fully supports quail management in Pennsylvania. So again, this is to recognize the partnership with Letterkenny Army Depot and the Pennsylvania Game Commission for quail restoration. Thank you so much. Absolutely, sir.
All right. Just want to give a shout out to my team here, Craig Finland and Matt Miller. I'm fairly new to public works. I've been at Letterkenny for a long time, and I do enjoy have enjoyed it for a long time. I've enjoyed it for a long time, the outdoors at Letterkenny and the surrounding areas. But just working with these guys for the past few months and seeing them for quite a few years now, it's a passion for them. It's not just a job. And I really appreciate what they've done for the depot and for wildlife conservation down there in the Franklin County area. And I want to thank you all for this award. And on behalf of Colonel Ledbetter, our commander, I'm here to accept it. We celebrate our 75th year this year down at Letterkenny Army Depot, have a big celebration, and it's going to be a nice addition to our collection today. Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask the director to stay up here, and I'm going to put those two characters on the spot as well. So if I could get Craig and Matt to come up, please. So this is not just a state restoration effort. This is actually a range restoration effort. So when we think about Pennsylvania, it's on the northern range of the bobwhite quail. And so Pennsylvania serves as part of a 25-state wildlife agency working group or conglomerate called National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative. And the NBCI, their goal is to restore bobwhites to their historical range in numbers that we saw sometime in the early 70s. And so when we think about doing a range-wide restoration, Letterkenny is being a partner within that is such an importance for the northern range. We're really the tip, and there's a lot of folks looking at Pennsylvania right now to see how things go. So we want to recognize through what's called the Firebird Award for 2017. Each state within NBCI is allowed to nominate someone that has made significant contributions within the past year for quail restoration within that state. And so we have nominated Letterkenny Army Depot, again, because they stepped forward and kind of gave us hope back that once again we will hear bobwhite's whistle for a next generation in Pennsylvania's farms and fields. So I'm going to present the National Firebird Conservation Award to Letterkenny Army Depot in recognition for the significant contribution that they have made over this past year as we move forward.
Thank you, President Hoover. Morning, Commissioners, Executive Director Burhans, and Deputy Executive Director Palmer. We've been invited to provide a few reports this morning, and I'd be glad to introduce our presenters. First of all, we're going to have Dr. Justin Brown, our wildlife veterinarian, talk about lead and bald eagles, a very timely topic considering the public testimony that we heard this morning. Following that, we're going to have Ian Craig, our game management division chief, talking about waterfowl program for the Game Commission here in the, since we're here at MiddleCreek, which is one of our featured waterfowl management areas. He's going to prepare some or provide some information on the topic of managed dove fields as well, and we'll conclude with an update on grouse and West Nile virus by our grouse biologist Lisa Williams. So, Justin, please.
Thank you for letting me come here and speak to you today. We'll follow up that emotional discussion on Sunday hunting with one that's probably just as equally as benign and simple, which is effects of lead on wildlife. And I changed the topic of, or at least the title of my discussion today, to causes of mortality in bald eagles, because really I didn't want this to be, it didn't start off as a study just on lead in bald eagles. Really, with our eagle population expanding as they do throughout Pennsylvania, one of the things we wanted to do is just monitor for all diseases of bald eagles and make sure that as we have this species that's recovering and thriving in Pennsylvania now and is a success story, that we make sure that we're not missing anything that's popping up as potential causes of disease in our populations. So this is data 06 to 2016. We had 228 diagnostic cases that we investigated. From 06 to 2011, we had a relatively low number of cases, just sort of got them sporadically, and as they were concerning mortality events that we couldn't explain, those were submitted. Starting in 2011 and continuing to 2016, we began to submit every case that we could get our hands on, regardless of condition, regardless of cause or apparent field signs. And the reason we wanted to do that is, again, we wanted to document what these different causes. Yes, we may have known that it was hit by a car, but could we document that and make sure that we're getting that data in our database? So this is the data here. You can see the vast majority or the most common cause of mortality that we saw was trauma. This combines hit by car or hit by train, often when the eagles are down, feeding and scavenging on road kills or train kills. It also includes sporadic eagles that were shot. We do have occasionally some infectious diseases, usually bacterial, fungal infections, a couple electrocutions, and then about a third of our bald eagle mortalities are associated with some level of the toxin. And when we look at the toxins that we found over the last few years, there were four categories where we had these toxins. We had anticoagulant rodenticides. Often these are some of our second generation rat baits that we put out there. So that when the eagles scavenge on those, they're persistent enough in the carcass that eagles can have bleeding issues from ingesting those. We had barbiturate toxicity, which were animals that were euthanized and not disposed of properly. We only actually, fortunately, had one of those. And carbamate pesticides, which are pretty common in all avian species, and we have had a few of those in bald eagles as well. By far, the most common toxin that caused mortality in our eagles was lead. Now, of these four different categories, barbiturates, anticoagulant rodenticides, and lead, all are associated with feeding behavior and the opportunistic scavenging of our eagles. So if we move on, and we'll start out just looking at all avian scavengers, because although we'll talk about eagles today, certainly lead is an issue we deal with in all scavenging species. I work at a large wildlife hospital throughout Vet School in Wildlife Center, Virginia, and we saw everything from turkey vultures to red-tailed hawks to anything that scavenges. We would see lead issues in them. Often there is a huge component of sampling bias, where if we see a dead red-tailed or a sick red-tail, those are much less often going to be submitted and worked up with full heavy metal profiles as some of our lead, or as some of our eagle cases. So we'll start out looking at aiding the scavengers in general. Lead is a heavy, relatively inexpensive and malleable metal, which is one of the reasons it's so useful in ammunition and tackle. And historically, there were many uses and sources of lead in the environment. Many of these have been banned or mitigated, and so a lot of these sources are no longer as prevalent, such as some of our paints with lead, gasoline, some of our storage batteries, etc. So, and we all know the story about lead and waterfowl. Certainly because of significant mortality that they were observing in waterfowl, as well as potential secondary toxicity from scavenging in eagles, it was banned in 1991, lead ammunition. So in regards to lead and how it works, often lead needs to be absorbed. It needs to hit a very basic or acidic environment to be absorbed and get into the body. Animals only become sick from lead toxicity if it is absorbed. So it's not so much the shot that's going into the muscle and residing there. Occasionally you can get some toxicity if it gets into a joint and it is absorbed. But the vast majority of our toxicity is going to come from lead that is ingested. In waterfowl, obviously, that shot that they were picking up from those environments. In some of our scavenging species, it's presumably ingesting lead that is in some of these carcasses. What happens, and some of the sources based on the literature that they've seen in raptors, as well as other scavengers, they have found associations with crippled or unretrieved carcasses. This could be nuisance or varmint hunting, ones that were shot and not retrieved. And certainly a lot of the data coming out is temporal associations with gut piles from some of the large game in the fall and into the winter. There's been a lot of research, we heard some of those facts earlier about the extent of fragmentation that occurs with some of these lead bullets. 30 to 40% can be left behind as the bullet passes through. Certainly we can see increased fragmentation if it hits something hard, such as a bone or something like that. And there's been a lot of work both looking at ballistic trials in carcasses as well as in gel, looking at the extent of how far that can go from the bullet trajectory. And certainly, as we've heard about this morning, 18 inches is sort of that level that's been shown to date. So it can go a lot further than I think once knew. What happens and why raptors are particularly susceptible is because of the acidic nature of their stomach. They have a very low pH, even lower than waterfowl. Can be anywhere from 1 to 2 is their pH. And so when you get those small fragments, they're absorbed readily and can be absorbed into the body. Once lead is absorbed into the body, it messes up quite a bunch of different physiologic systems. You can have effects on the nervous system, in your blood, and your ability to create red blood cells in your bones as well as in your digestive system. So once it gets absorbed, you can see a whole host of different bodily responses that are impacted by the lead. As far as what that looks like in an animal, I think if you talk to anyone who's worked with these birds in a rehab setting or officers that's found them in a field, it's one of the more sad and painful things to look at. You have this extremely powerful bird, and when you find them in a field, they're limp, they're weak, you can pick them up, they don't even know you're there a lot of the time. And so it can be a debilitating disease in this sort of majestic, powerful bird. It is a chronic disease in most of our raptor species, so a lot of the signs we see are progressive. They're not the kind of pesticide where you'll go out and you'll see just a bunch of dead animals. It is absorbed, and it takes time for this disease to occur. So you can see muscle wasting. They're extremely weak. It can affect their neurologic signs. They can be blind. They can tremor and just be generally unaware of their surroundings. When we get these birds to our setting and are conducting necropsies on them, a lot of the clinical signs can be pretty subtle. We can see It makes their feces turn bright green and it's sort of caked around their vent because the birds, again, are not flighted. They're usually down on the ground because of weakness. So they're sitting and they've got this sort of bright green feces out of the vent. You can see a dilation of gallbladder. And probably the most common thing that we see is just going to be that muscle wasting. So in birds, we look at their chest to look at their chest muscles and see how wasted they are. And a lot of these birds, their keel is like a hatchet, and you can feel none of that breast muscle just because they're so weak and emaciated. One of the things we see in raptors and a lot of our species is just that oftentimes the source of lead may not be present in their body. Again, this is particularly true with a lot of our scavengers. They're ingesting these small fragments, they're absorbing it with their really low pH proventriculus, and then a lot of the remaining lead can either be regurgitated or passed through, but the damage has already been done because it's been absorbed. So when we do radiographs, which is part of our workup normally, it's inconsistent whether or not we'll see actually the source of lead in their proventriculus. If they get a large chunk, then we may still see it because it takes a while to break that down. But considering how susceptible they are to really small fragments, whether or not we see lead radiographically or when we're doing a necropsy, it's pretty inconsistent. And I'd say the majority of cases we may not see it. So without being able to see that source, a lot of our diagnostics and how we piece together a case sort of takes together everything we're seeing. So we've taken a history, we're looking at the clinical signs if there were any and it wasn't found yet. We're looking for those lesions which are pretty subtle and may not always be present. And so in the majority of these cases, it's going to come down to actually testing in a lab setting how much lead is in their body. And this could be done in a clinical setting when the animal's alive, looking at their blood. In our case, we actually test all of our birds with their liver samples. As far as treatment, it can be attempted in live birds. It often is unsuccessful, as we heard this morning. By the time we get the birds, oftentimes they're so far gone, they've absorbed too much lead that the success in actually bringing them back is pretty low. That being said, even if you are able to bring back a bird, it generally takes weeks at a time, and it is something that I think anyone who's worked with them in a clinical setting will not forget, because it's daily, hourly treatment just to get these birds through the toxin. So as far as the epidemiology and what we see again, it's not just an eagle issue. We see it in a variety of our raptor species, a variety of our upland game bird species. We can see cases. Certainly it's probably hit the headlines a lot more with some of our more visible species like our California condors, like our eagles, golden or bald. But certainly we see toxicity across a variety of our raptors and scavenging species. They were hoping, obviously, and part of the reason for that lead ban in the 90s was to hopefully reduce some of the mortality we were seeing in eagles. But what they've seen when they look at mortality subsequent to the ban is that they have not seen any change in mortality in a lot of our scavenging species. We do see toxicity in a wide range, both between different species and even within a species. And I think a lot of the common questions we get is, well, why don't we see it as much in turkey vultures or in this species or that species or mammals? And so we do see a lot of variability between different species and groups of animals. We know that it varies with the diet. We know it varies with age. Young are more susceptible than the old. We see a lot of variation in how they absorb the lead and how they process it and how it impacts an animal. So we do see a lot of variability even within a species. Often it is individual animal mortality events. So again, like a lot of our toxins, maybe some of our pesticides, we may go out and maybe dramatic mortality with multiple birds. This is not one of those. It's going to be an individual animal, oftentimes, that we see down in an area. And that's largely because of how long it takes for the disease to occur. For seasonality, we can see bald eagle and raptor mortality from lead throughout the year, but there has been increasing reports in multiple species and in multiple regions of the country that show an association with lead that falls in line with big game hunting. Typically, it's in that mid to late fall and into the winter months. And again, presumably most of these have associated with ingestion from gut piles or other things left out in the field or unretrieved animals. As far as management options, there have been a whole host of things that states have done. I think often what goes to the top and what is most visible would be something like what California did, where it was a statewide ban, initially just in the condor areas, but moving towards a statewide ban. But if you look, there's a whole range of what different states have done in regards to ban, whether that is banning the use of lead for certain species, such as rails, gallinules, muskrats, things like that, whether there's a ban for certain areas with high-risk species or species of concern, whether it's management units or even certain state game limits. So there's a whole range of management and options that different states have tried in regards to a ban on them. But ban is certainly not the only thing that's been done from a management perspective. Certainly there's been an increasing number of states that have simply taken the route of recommending the use of some of the non-toxic sources of ammunition that are out in the field and implementing voluntary use. Basically investing hunters in the process of trying to mitigate some of these issues with lead and raptors. And that usually goes along very closely with what we heard about this morning is sort of a larger public education standpoint, highlighting what non-toxic ammunition is out there, trying to get away from the idea that it's got poor performance and things like that, recognizing issues with the increased cost in some of these areas. But then beyond just that, highlighting options if you don't choose to use non-toxic. So what can you do there? Whether it's burying gut piles, retrieving animals, things like that. Because a lot of, I think, in my communications with hunters or with the general public is it's still surprising to hear how many people don't realize the scope of this process or this issue. So in regards to our data, we had sort of lead as one of our top mortality factors in our eagles. So starting in 06, one of the things we also wanted to do, and because sometimes the diagnosis of lead can be so challenging, if we're looking for those lesions which can be subtle, we can't see lead on radiographs, we don't have those other factors. We just said with our expanding population that's coming back, we want to just test all of our eagles that we can for lead, just to get a background level of what are they being exposed to, regardless of how they've died or our diagnosis. So from 06 to 2016, again, our 228 eagles were submitted. We were able to test 202 of those for liver on or for lead on their liver values. And this is based on literature, quite a lot of literature from eagles specifically, and they've set backgrounds of liver levels based on these different values. 0.2 is sort of that range of negative to almost likely to have no effect. 2 to 6 parts per million would be sort of a subclinical dose that these animals are being exposed to. And then anything over 6 parts per million, we're probably looking at some level of disease being caused in that eagle. Over 10 is consistent with an acute mortality in that bird. So those were sort of the breakdown of our liver testing values. So out of our 202 eagles that we tested, about 30% of them had detectable levels of lead that would be sublethal to lethal in their body, about 30%. And of those, 28% would be at levels that would be considered enough to cause disease or mortality in that bird. We looked at it a little bit closer. We did not see a significant effect of age on the birds. However, consistent with a lot of the other studies, our adult birds were more likely to have those higher concentrations consistent with mortality. They've seen this in a couple different states. They think it is probably associated with behavior, where when you come to a gut pile, the older animal is going to sort of get the first shot at it, maybe have the first shot at the bullet trajectory where there's going to be that very soft tissue, and they're likely to get the higher dose. We did see a higher, significantly higher level in our female versus our male eagles. We looked just really superficially at geographic range. We didn't see any difference between PGC regions. However, certainly that's something we want to look at a little bit closer and get a more refined spatial scale to see if we can't tie it to something a little bit more useful than region, but that's ongoing. We broke it into 5-year periods, and we are starting to see what we think is an increasing number of cases over time. Certainly there's a lot of biases in there because we're getting more eagle cases over time. I don't think there's any increased amount of lead in the environment, so probably any increase that we're seeing over time simply reflects the fact that we have more eagles on the landscape, more eagles in our state, so we're just going to see more cases in general. We looked at when we got our eagle cases over the year, and one of the things we could see looking at this data is that certainly we see lead toxicity throughout the year. So it's not just big game hunting, it's not just one season, we can't tie it to one thing in particular. We are seeing toxicity throughout the year. That being said, when we look at month, there was a significant effect on month, and most of our eagle cases in that severe acute state are occurring in that November to February timeframe, in obviously temporally associated with our big game hunting. So that's when we're seeing the majority of our cases. So I think one of the questions that we frequently then go to as wildlife managers is this population limited? And I don't think we're seeing anything in regards to our eagle populations being limited in the state. They're increasing in number. They're being found in new areas throughout the state. So our eagle populations are doing well. That being said, we certainly have led as what appears to be an increasing number of cases, and consistently is probably our number one, if not one of our top causes of mortality in eagles throughout our state. So that is basically what I have for you here today, and I'd be happy to address any questions you have.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We've needed that. We've all wanted to hear about it. I guess the point that I'm kind of concerned about, I agree with you, all the literature talks about essentially the period when we started hunting with rifles, and then, when they could get something from the carcass. But this summer now, we've seen, 11, I think, total. And it's in the summertime. It's not following your graph. Why all of a sudden are we seeing it in the summer? Are we doing more testing? Are there really more bargain hunters than there used to be? Any explanation as to why we're seeing it now?
I think one of the things we see is that we will see it throughout the year, as long as there is varmint hunting and all these other things that they can get into. So I do think there is a component of we are going to see this year round, and we will see our peak in that time period, November to February. I do think the increasing number of cases we are seeing, so that's more of a month-by-month evaluation. From a year-to-year and why this year might be worse than last year and something like that, I think a lot of those do have to do with our expanding population, but we just have more eagles out there, so we are just going to get that many more cases. I do think a lot of it may also have to do with biases as well, where once we start to get a few of these cases, particularly if they are high profile, people are just going to be ramped up and more alert. Maybe cases are submitted more readily than they would be before. So there probably is some level of biases, but certainly I think it's just that combination of, you are going to see it year-round. There is that threat from all those the sources that are out there, but that our eagle population is just increasing.
Are we seeing it more? Let me just rephrase that. Fish. Where does that fall into this? We see toxicity in fish, and the levels increasing, and there's eating bans and whatnot on certain fish. Could that possibly be part of the equation that's causing the increase?
There has been some research to look into that. Certainly more could be warranted, but the thought is generally that the amount of lead in an animal that's died of lead toxicity, whether it's fish or something else, is probably not enough to put an eagle into acute toxicity. It's enough to because they have these body burdens of lead. And so it's enough to raise the body burden of a lead, but not to put them in that toxic level. That to actually get to that level where they're seeing disease, seeing mortality, they actually have to get to the lead source itself rather than an animal that's died of it, per se.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. There isn't any particular issue or crisis that we're dealing with here relative to waterfowl, but we are all sitting at what is really one of the crown jewels for waterfowl in Pennsylvania, MiddleCreek Wildlife Management Area. And so it seemed like a good time and place to just give an overview of what the Game Commission does for the waterfowl resource in Pennsylvania. Back before I was an office biologist, I got my baptism as with the Game Commission on waterfowl, and I mean that literally. 2 months into the job, June of 2000, I was helping out with goose banding and Shares in Pond in Clearfield County. The geese went one way, did a sharp turn. I tried to do the same thing in the canoe, and physics took over, and I went. Our Bureau Safety Officer never found out about that until now, I think, Bob. So hopefully the statute of limitations is expired, and I don't think we'll do any remedial boating safety training. In my job now, obviously, I have much more broader responsibilities, and so I can't delve in anywhere near as much detail with waterfowl as I used to, but I still try to keep some involvement in some of those details, and so I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to be here this morning and present this information to you. Hopefully this is well-known background information to everybody, but it's pretty important to realize that waterfowl, unlike deer, bear, turkey, a lot of the resident species that we deal with, are not something that we can just make decisions as our own as an agency for. Ultimately, waterfowl are under federal authority because of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. However, it is a cooperative research and management process for these species. There's cooperative monitoring programs between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the state agencies. And the states also have an opportunity for input into the regulatory process through the Flyway Council system, which I won't talk about in a lot of detail in the interest of time, but when you hear those terms, that's where Flyway Councils come in terms of states providing input to the federal oversight on regulatory issues. Pennsylvania probably isn't typically thought of as a big waterfowl state the way you might think of, say, Maryland or Arkansas. But we actually do have pretty heavy use of the waterfowl resource in Pennsylvania. If you look at the average annual number of duck and goose hunters per year for the 5-year period, 2011 to 2015, Pennsylvania ranked second in the Atlantic Flyway to North Carolina in terms of the number of duck hunters, and we actually ranked first in the Flyway in terms of the number of goose hunters. So there is certainly a lot of consumptive use of the resource, as well as a lot of non-consumptive use of the resource. From the 2011 Federal Survey of Wildlife Associated Recreation, they estimated that almost 500,000 both resident and non-resident participants each year participate in specifically waterfowl viewing in Pennsylvania. And again, here at MiddleCreek is ground zero for that. I wasn't able to find any specific figures on what those numbers mean in terms of expenditures, but certainly all the local businesses here around MiddleCreek in late February, early March, when the spectacle of snow goose and swan migration is passing through, those gas stations and restaurants are certainly benefiting very much from the waterfowl resource. Well, when you ask a biologist to give one of these talks, you're obviously going to get a heavy dose of research and population management and those parts of the agency's program, and I will be doing that, but I don't want to leave a mistaken impression that the things that happen in my shop are all that the agency does for the waterfowl resource. Like almost everything that our agency does for wildlife, it's very much a team effort, and there are different people with different responsibilities carrying out these different aspects of management programs. And just a few examples of that, in the Bureau of Information Information and Education. Cora Jagno is our Human Dimensions Specialist, as you probably know. She's a member of the Human Dimensions Working Group of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, which provides strategic guidance to integrate human dimensions into waterfowl and wetland conservation to maintain or increase participation in waterfowl hunting and viewing, as well as increasing public support. And just recently, there's been national surveys of hunters, birders, and the general public completed to begin to address those goals. I shot a climate tuning there, and in terms of habitat management, both the Bureau of Wildlife Habitat Management and the regions put a lot of effort into waterfowl habitat management. You see a list there of some of our important waterfowl areas, obviously right here at MiddleCreek, a number of Susquehanna River Islands, game lands, state game lands 180, Shoal Lake in the northeast region, obviously game lands 213 and 214, climate tuning and Geneva Marsh up in the northwestern part of the state, and really all through the northwest in that glaciated area. There's so many wetlands and potholes. It's probably the single best region of our state for waterfowl, so a number of the small individual game lands there have waterfowl management as a focus. And during fiscal year 16, according to habitat management figures, the Game Commission spent almost $650,000 on waterfowl habitat work. That includes water control structures, dam and dike maintenance, nesting structures, wetland improvements, and waterfowl propagation area maintenance. From the law enforcement side, between the Bureau of Wildlife Protection and the regions, between 2013 and 2016, there were 7 specific waterfowl enforcement details, and overall, from 2013 to present, a little over 1,000 waterfowl-related violations were prosecuted. Maybe one of the most dramatic of those was a group of hunters that got a little carried away shooting snow geese here right in this area. This was a case prosecuted in the southeast region by conservation officers Sheets and Brockmeyer and Deputy Ed Shutter. This group of so-called hunters, I guess I'll say, killed 265 geese over the limit. That case resulted in over $55,000 in fines. Each of the individual hunters received 15 years of revocation on their license. 340 of the geese were sent to a processor, and 281 pounds of goose meat was processed and donated to the Harrisburg food bank, so at least they didn't completely go to waste. And then the $1,700 processing fee for those geese was paid by the defendants. So I'm obviously not doing justice to all the other parts of the agency that have their own role in waterfowl management, but I think that at least makes the point that there's a lot more than just the Bureau of Wildlife Management involved in managing the waterfowl resource in our state. Moving on to some of the science and monitoring that we do, one important thing, like any species that we manage, we need to have good data to use to make decisions. And one of the important things we need is just population estimates. Since the late 1980s, early 1990s, Pennsylvania, along with all the Atlantic Flyway states from Virginia up through New Hampshire, has participated in the Atlantic Flyway Breeding Waterfowl Survey. This is a ground-based survey. Pennsylvania is divided into 6 physiographic regions, and then there are individual ground plots, 1 square kilometer in size each, that are scattered around there. We have about 300 in the state. Of those, these were all randomly selected originally to be able to give a good population estimate. About 100 out of those 300 don't have any water on them, and so they automatically get a 0 count every year. The other 200, between Bureau and region staff, we go out and check each year in late April, early May, count all the ducks and geese seen on the plot, and then that's rolled up to the flyway level to get population estimates. At the state level, you can see a couple of the trends here that we've seen over time. The green line here is our breeding mallard population, and as many hunters are aware, that has shown a decline over time. The yellow here is wood ducks, and that population is much better news, stable to slightly increasing over time. And the black duck numbers, because they're so low, you can't really see the trend, but that's actually also declining over time to the point where black ducks have become a pretty rare breeding species in Pennsylvania. Our resident Canada goose population, all through the decade of the 1990s, that population was rapidly and steadily increasing. We We peaked out probably in about 2003, 2004. Since then, with some more liberal hunting seasons, we have decreased that population somewhat, and for the last decade or so, that's been relatively stable, around 250,000 birds in the spring. As I mentioned, one piece of the puzzle that we need to know is how many of these birds are out there, but there's also a lot of things we need to know, where we need to be able to track an individual bird and find out what happens to it. How long does it live? Where does it migrate from and to? What are the harvest and survival rates? How does that vary by age, species, and sex? And how does that change as we change hunting regulations? And the most cost-efficient way to mark a lot of individual birds to be able to answer those questions is with lake banding. And so we have a couple different programs that I'll briefly mention here. One of those is resident goose banding. That takes place in late June each year as the geese are going through a flightless period. They have all their feathers molted and can easily be rounded up. And we, other than pine and tuning in MiddleCreek, where we band essentially every year, we tend to rotate sites from year to year around the state. Typically, other than those two management areas, we won't return to an individual site on more often than a 3-year rotation. But each year we'll band usually around 20 counties, a couple locations in each county, and band anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 again to geese. We're just wrapping up, and if anyone was able to be here yesterday for the duck banding demonstration, that was actually our final day this year for the state of preseason duck banding. Another important program, this is in contrast to goose banding, where we move around and vary sites quite a bit from year to year. Duck banding tends to be consistent here at MiddleCreek, up at Pine and Tuning, Haldeman Island, and some of the Shohola, and some of the other areas in the northeast region. Just sites that are consistently holding good numbers of ducks over time. So this takes place in August and September each year. We have banding goals for mallards, wood ducks, and black ducks. You see in the orange, here is the mallard goal, and you can see most years we've exceeded that. In the blue is the wood duck goal, and probably about half of the time we meet that goal. Half the time we fall a little short, but over time it pretty much evens out that we just about make that goal. The black duck goal we haven't made in a number of years. I haven't showed that on here, but because of those populations declining, we banned maybe a couple dozen now in a good year during the preseason. And there's a lot of information we get from this, and this is just one example. I realize you can't see any of the individual numbers in the green here, but that's not really the point. It's just a graph over about 20 years of the distribution of Pennsylvania banded wood duck recoveries. So as you might expect, there's a heavy concentration in the northwest where lots of banded around Pine and Tuning, here in the southeast around MiddleCreek, and in some of our big waterfowl areas in the northeast region. But we also get these recoveries all through the Atlantic flyway, good concentration in the Carolinas, and even over into Louisiana. So some really neat things that both we as an agency get, and the individual hunters that harvest these birds get the information back on where they're banded. But from a management standpoint, this is really important information to tell us where these birds go and how regulation changes affect them. You may remember about a decade ago, we raised the wood duck bag limit from 2 birds per day to 3 birds per day. And this has been an important check on that. It did show that harvest rates increased, but it's still at an acceptable level that it wasn't a negative impact on the population. So there's all sorts of data that we get from these programs. I mentioned that our preseason black duck bandings have decreased a lot over time. That's the case for a lot of other states as well. And so for that reason, about 7 years ago, the Atlantic and Mississippi Flyways, in coordination with the Fish and Wildlife Service, initiated a postseason black duck banding program. So that's during the winter months when there's more black ducks in this part of North America. They're still doing pretty well in their northern breeding range in the Maine and Quebec and the Maritime provinces, but it's pretty hard to catch them up there during the summer. So we've shifted to doing some winter banding to catch more black ducks. Again, Pennsylvania has some banding goals. Each year we shoot to band 150 black ducks during the winter in the northwest region. And most years we've made that. In the rest of the state, certainly here at MiddleCreek as well as some other areas, we try to band 50 each year. And again, most years we've made estimate that. I actually did have a chance to add 2016 and 17 to this graph. We actually haven't done quite as well the last couple winters, which is a combination of budget-related personnel limitations, as well as just the fact that we've had such warm winters the last couple of years that it makes it more difficult to keep ducks on bait and catch them. And this project will be continuing for at least a couple more years. The black duck daily bag limit this year increased from 1 bird to 2 for the first time in about 30 years, so that's a pretty big change, and we'd like to get at least a couple years of data from after that change to see how that bag limit change affects the black duck population. Moving on to a couple research projects. In the early 2000s, we cooperated with Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina on a tundra swan migration study. And this is, again, just some of the neat information you get. We caught, over the course of 2 winters, I believe it was 10 total tundra swans, either right here at MiddleCreek or in the general vicinity. Put satellite transmitters on them, and then we were able to follow their migratory journeys up to Hudson Bay and up to the Athabasca River Delta up in the Northwest Territories. Pretty neat to be able to follow these birds for a couple thousand miles as they're making their migratory journeys. It was interesting that for now a lot of these, either the transmitter failed or the bird died, so we weren't able to follow all of them for a long time. But the ones we were able to get multiple years of data on, we found that they were very consistent with these breeding areas. They go right back to the same area each spring. However, the wintering areas differ quite a bit, so we might catch them in MiddleCreek one winter, but they might not come back here at all the next year. They might be down in Virginia or Back Bay of Virginia or down by North Carolina. So we've got a lot of good information for management out of that project. One that we have going on currently is a cooperative project between the Game Commission, the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources, and West Virginia University. And we're looking at black duck habitat in western Pennsylvania and northern West Virginia. This is a companion project to a lot of work that's been done along the Atlantic coast in recent years, basically looking at how many black ducks are there in the winter, how are they distributed, how much energy do they need to make it through the winter, and how much energy is available in the habitat to carry them through. And that helps identify areas where there's an energy deficit that can be addressed through habitat management. So we're continuing to cooperate, and should give a shout out to the Northwest region here, has provided a lot of the assistance in terms of access to that grad student for surveys and habitat work to carry out this project. So we'll see some interesting results for this one in the next couple of years. I'll finish up with just a brief overview of how we set waterfowl seasons, again, because this is a process that's dictated by the federal government rather than the states. It doesn't necessarily fit nicely into our January and April commission meeting schedule. For ducks, our overall season length and framework dates in the Atlantic Flyway are currently based just on the status of eastern mallards. It's called adaptive harvest management. We're actually in the process of moving in the next couple of years to including a few other species in that mix, which is mainly because the southern Atlantic Flyway states don't harvest a lot of mallards, and so this will be a more representative process. Most of the other individual species are managed through controlling their daily bag limits, and then the season selections within the federal frameworks that are set can vary by zone. And we have 4 duck zones in Pennsylvania, so we can distribute the usually 60 available days within each zone as preferred by hunters in that zone. And so overall across the state, there's more than 60 days of duck hunting available if anyone's willing to travel between zones. For goose seasons, the season length, bag limits, and framework dates generally follow approved harvest strategies for the different individual populations. That is complicated, as I mentioned here at the bottom, by the overlap during winter, especially of our resident populations, which are doing very well, in some cases too well, and some of the migratory populations that nest in the Arctic migrate down here and then mix with the resident population during the winter. It makes it difficult to manage those populations when some are doing well, others are not, and they're mixed on hunting seasons. So certainly adds some complications there. But again, for that reason, we have different goose zones in Pennsylvania. The southern James Bay population zone in the northwest the Atlantic population zone here in the southeast, which have higher concentrations of migrants, and so we have to be somewhat more conservative on those seasons. And then the resident population zone through the middle of the state where we can be more liberal because there are very few migrants located. And that goes back to the data that we get from our banding programs. Public input is certainly an important part of this process, just as it is in our season setting for resident species. However, because of the timing, it works out a little bit differently. We hold a Pennsylvania Waterfowl Symposium each year. That used to happen in early August. The regulatory schedule has changed now so that happens in March, and that enables us to get the waterfowl seasons into the Hunting and Trapping Digest, which is a nice feature. At that meeting every year, we announce the federal frameworks, go over any changes, and present some information on recent population trends in our research projects. And then we get feedback from waterfowl hunters. Both organizations and individuals show up and they provide us with their comments and preferences on waterfowl season selections for that year. Of course, that's only the most avid individuals that show up. It might be a few dozen people, but that certainly doesn't, or at least can't be assumed to represent every hunter in Pennsylvania. And so we also have a dedicated waterfowl comments email account that we take comments to each year in the spring. And then we heavily rely on results from our waterfowl hunter survey, which we conducted in 2011 and got feedback from about 2,000 duck and goose hunters. And here's just one example of the information we got from that survey that we used. We asked hunters in each duck zone when during available time frames is most important to you to hunt. And you see it varies quite a bit, tends to be a little bit later in the Lake Erie zone. It just varies by time period and by zone. One thing that makes this really complicated is you often have different preferences between the very avid hunters that hunt a lot and the less avid hunters that have a different preference. And so, as I mentioned at Jerry Fish's retirement the other evening, he's used the phrase, which I think is true a lot of times. One set of hunters asks us for white and another set asks us for black, and we end up giving them both gray. So we all know how that works. It's hard to satisfy everybody. So that's just a really brief overview of what we do for waterfowl in Pennsylvania. At lunchtime, if anybody can identify this bird that showed up in one of our duck traps at Pine Tuning in 2008, we'll give you a bonus question. I do have just 3 slides on a little research on managed dove fields, but before I go into those, I'll pause and ask if there's any questions on the waterfowl management.
Any questions? Fisher?
Moving on, this is a topic that came up at the August working group meeting, and I certainly don't have any extensive details or final details to present yet, but I've done a little bit of research and will share with you what I have so far. There's still a lot more we need to do to figure out what we might want to do with this. Just by way of background, it's interesting that other than Rhode Island, all the states north and east of us do not have open dove seasons. Pretty much everyone south and west of us, except for Michigan, does have an open season. So we're in kind of an interesting geographic position in terms of dove hunting. And so when this topic came up, I went ahead and contacted my counterparts in several of our adjoining states or nearby states, Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, and both of the Carolinas, just to ask them some questions about this and get some feedback. So I contacted those 7 states. So far I've heard back from 3 of them, and we'll go through this in detail, but each of those 3 states does have a public land managed dove field program with a number of dove fields. Size varies a fair amount between states. West Virginia doesn't have any special youth-only hunts. North Carolina has some combined youth and adult hunts, but no specific youth hunts. South Carolina does have some dedicated fields to youth hunters. I asked them, do you do anything specific to manage hunter use? West Virginia, for the most part, doesn't. They do have a drawing for permits on one area, but for the most part, it's first come, first served. North Carolina is pretty similar, has some areas that require a permit, and those number of permits are limited to manage the hunter pressure. In South Carolina, about a third of their fields, they do a drawing just for the first day of the season, but on the other 2/3 of the fields on opening day, and for the whole state, other than the first day, those are just first come, first served. I asked them about some of the other management considerations that might be an issue. The primary plantings that they use on their managed dove fields is probably no surprise: sunflower, millet, and in some cases corn. They use various management techniques: mowing, disking, burning, and herbicide. And I don't want to get out of my lane here because this gets into what constitutes baiting regulations in Pennsylvania, and this is some of the things we still need to look into. What can be done, what is a normal agricultural or wildlife management practice, and what isn't. But these are some of the techniques that are at least used in other states that we need to keep looking at. I asked if there were any mating issues in regard to other species, not doves specifically. There weren't any concerns mentioned for upland species, deer or turkeys. They did mention that waterfowl baiting regulations tend to be interpreted quite a bit more strictly than dove baiting regulations, and so you probably want to avoid having dove fields, or at least avoid having dove fields open to waterfowl hunting, because that could create a baiting concern. The negatives that they mentioned for their managed dove fields, they said it is very labor intensive and pretty high cost to keep these things planted and managed, and also it's a very short window where they get heavy use, as you might expect from the fact that for the most part it's first come, first served in those states that I've heard back from. They all said there's both the dove use and the hunter use drops off quite a bit in these managed fields after the first few days or first couple weekends anyway of the season. But on the other hand, they all did say there's high hunter interest for those first few days, and it is a very popular program. Just one example, South Carolina mentioned that they surveyed 31 of their fields on opening day and found that they were used by greater than 3,000 hunters. I suspect that's not all at one time. It's probably some coming and some going throughout the course of the day, but still they're providing a service that at least their hunters are appreciating quite a bit. So, as I say, there's still a lot we don't know and need to look at in regard to if and how we can use this type of a program in Pennsylvania, but that's a little bit of what we have so far. And I don't know if I have enough background to answer any questions on this, but I can try if there are any.
Thank you. The managed fields, they mowing those crops, place the doves in.
Yeah, so essentially they're mowing it to get the seed laid down on the ground and be attracted to those. Yes.
Typically, I guess, during the season, they're different. They'll mow 4 or 5 rows down on a week, and then mow 4 or 5 more.
Exactly, it's a progressive thing.
That's what I've seen in the other states that I wanted to do manage me. Other questions? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I had to wait that 1 minute. I thought maybe you were going to give me lunch before I talk, but no such luck. Thank you for inviting me down to provide this update, and welcome. Which I haven't met yet. I'm going to talk about the work that we did this summer, primarily looking at West Nile virus and the impact on the rough grouse populations. And this is really, we're about 4 years into this project. We spent, I really kind of spent 2 years looking at data, talking to other states, trying to figure out what was going on with rough grouse. So that probably started in around 2013, and we're now 2 years into active hands-on research. So I just wanted to give you an update of where we were. And this is a project that Justin Brown and I have been heavily involved in and could not have been done without his contacts in the world of animal pathology and laboratory capacity. So really, it's very collaborative and it has worn us both out at different times. What I'd like to do is give you an update, first of all, just on the current rough grouse status. We do have this last year's data that I want to show you. Also the status of West Nile virus. We have 2 years of data now on West Nile virus in harvested grouse. And then talk specifically about what we looked at this summer, which was really focused on trying to figure out some of the details of how this virus is working in grouse habitat. And then I'll finish off with some preliminary sort of gut feel management options that I think we're starting to develop. So as far as status, this is hunter flush rates. And I just want to point out that these hunter flush rates are data coming from good habitat. So we know that habitat is driving grouse populations and lack of young forest habitat. But hunters go to good grouse habitat to hunt. So when we start to see problems in good habitat, then we know that we have an issue that we need to deal with. So we have had lower flush rates in 50 years of monitoring. You know, we're now kind of hitting record lows pretty much year after year. And 3 of those have occurred since West Nile virus came into the state. So again, it's good habitat. It's very concerning when you see populations start to do that. But I also want to point out that we are not alone. Other Mid-Atlantic states are seeing the same thing. Most of our neighbors are at record lows or near record lows for grouse. So this is not unique to Pennsylvania, but it certainly is concerning. If I look at our summer observations, these are our observations in June, July, and August, and they include our brood observations. We also see that we have had these record lows occur since West Nile virus came in. That's 36 years of continuous and consistent monitoring. So again, when you start to see this happening, that's really where our concern came from. As far as the status of West Nile virus this summer, the news has not been good. It was a record early detection for the virus on the landscape. It was found actually in April in Pennsylvania, setting us up for an extremely bad year. We got a little bit lucky, I think, with some cool weather through the spring that kind of kept a governor on the cycle. But you can see as soon as the weather heated up, it starts to heat up, you know, July, August, it really took off in Pennsylvania. And this graph shows you the current positive pools that they're seeing. And that dotted line, if you can see it, is the 10-year average. So we are much higher than the 10-year average that's occurred prior to. So we know that we're in an exceptionally bad year for the virus, and that really leads to an exceptionally bad year for grouse. Many of you have seen this slide. This is the challenge study that we did. For those of you not familiar, we actually took a sample of Pennsylvania grouse chicks and we gave them the virus to see how it affected them, because some birds are not affected. What we found is that it very dramatically affects rough grouse. It causes damage and inflammation primarily to heart and brain tissue. So of the group of birds that we studied, 100% of those birds that we had given the virus to had damage or inflammation in the heart, and 90% of them had severe, moderate to severe damage or inflammation in the brain. So it hits them very hard, very quickly. 40% of the birds died in the first week. An additional 30 to 50% had this inflammation or necrosis to the point where it probably affects the survival of the bird. So we did have 10%. We had one little bird that seemed to shrug off the virus and not be affected. But those are not good odds. We have now done the second year of hunter harvested sampling because because we saw it in the lab doesn't mean that it's happening in the wild. So we wanted to see what's going on with our wild birds. We finished up 2 years of that now. We've looked at 400 birds, 41 out of 67 counties. were sampled, and essentially what we have seen is that where we have grouse, we have West Nile virus affecting grouse. We have, our objectives of the study was to see if it is cycling in grouse. Yes, it is occurring in every region of the state. We are seeing some interesting differences from one region to another. But the good news, I guess, if there can be good news, is that we do have survivors. And so this map is showing you birds that survived West Nile exposure and lived to be hunted. So we do have survivors in the population. Once they get the disease and they recover, that protection probably lasts for their lifetime. So that gives us some management opportunities. The fact that we do have survivors and we can work with that population. If you look at how the populations are responding to West Nile, it varies pretty dramatically if you're talking about the core of the grouse range. This is our core range up in the northwest. The north central would be very similar. And what you find is when you have an extremely bad year for the virus, you see this dramatic crash. But then if they get a break, the population recovers really quickly and really robustly. So actually, these are very high numbers, higher, well above long-term average, and then they get hit again, and then they get hit again. This is not on here, but 2017 will be a new red bar. So the concern is that as these bad years come closer and closer together, if that's going to be a pattern, then we really have an urgent management situation, even where we have good grouse populations. So that's the northwest, north central regions. If you look in the northeast and the southern regions, you see a more grim picture where you have a population will crash after the virus comes through. They do, mount somewhat of a recovery, but it's fairly anemic, and then they crash again, and they crash again. Again, I have another red bar to add to the graph. So. The question then again is, what will happen if we have these bad viral years more frequently? The other question I often get from hunters is what's happening, what's the difference between these northern and southern regions? And I think that's really a combination of factors. The northern regions have, certainly the north central and northwest have almost ideal grouse habitat, where we have that perfect combination of northern hardwood forest, aspen, we have oak. It's a very good forest type for grouse, as opposed to the southern regions where we have more of an oak hickory, which is a little harder to manage for grouse and a little harder for grouse to make a living in. So it could be forest type. It could be the fact that we have intact populations in the north. We still have enough birds to work with in the north so that when they go through a crash, they can repopulate. And we're lacking that in the south. It could also be habitat quantity. Maybe they're just more habitat in the north that's suitable for them, and they're able to take advantage of that. So there are different factors. A lot of time this gets sort of shorthand. People say, well, there's more habitat in the north, and that's why it's better. But there are a lot of other sort of issues that play into that. So the objectives then for this year were to try to figure out, we see that there's significant population issues, try to figure out what exactly is going on in grouse habitat. And the reason we have to do that is because most of the surveillance for West Nile virus and pretty much all of the research behind the disease happens near human population centers. So when I went to DEP and started asking them about West Nile virus and grouse, they just didn't have the data. The data is just not there. They didn't really understand the cycle in those northern remote woodland situations. So our objectives for this summer were to try to better understand specifically what's happening with grouse, what mosquitoes are involved. There are certain mosquitoes that DEP monitors for humans, but there are 50 to 60 different mosquitoes in Pennsylvania, different species. And what bites humans is not necessarily what's biting grouse. So we needed to figure just that basic information. Once we know those mosquitoes, where do they breed? Is it a situation that we can control? And does this DEP DEP surveillance effort have any relevance to grouse? I just showed you this graph showing that this is a bad year, but that's based on human population centers. So is that hold true for grouse populations? So those were objectives going into the study this summer. In order to get to those questions, we used Scotia Game Lands 176 in Center County, and I selected in consultation with DEP, we looked at sites that were near water, different types of water, permanent water, seasonal water, muck water. And then I was also within those areas selecting areas that grouse use. So for instance, we had a drummer here this spring. This site down here, we had hens nesting in 2015, and one of those hens was positive for West Nile virus. So that's how the sites were selected, relevance to the bird and to the disease. And we trapped every week pretty much from mid-June through mid-September, so we had 10 weeks total. We trapped 2 days per week, collected mosquitoes 2 days per week, which ends up being a 3 to 4 day job by the time you get the traps out, bring the traps in. 10 weeks total, and in each site, we put out 2 different types of traps. This is a gravid or a stagnant water trap. It's very good at attracting the mosquitoes that carry West Nile virus for humans. This one is a light trap or a carbon dioxide trap. So this cooler is full of dry ice and it's off-gassing carbon dioxide. It is very good at making the mosquitoes think that there's a big animal sitting there in the woods waiting to be bitten. So it attracts more of a diversity of mosquitoes. Put those at each site and selected sites where we know grouse are using them. Well, here's what we found. This is just 7 weeks of data. This data goes through mid-July because at that point then DEP got swamped with human responsibilities for West Nile, so we're waiting for that late summer data. We collected 3,390 mosquitoes. I think all but 20 bit us while we were doing it. To our amazement, we had 25 different species show up. I didn't even know there were 25 different species when I started working on this project. Turns out there are 50 to 60 in Pennsylvania. We have almost half of them in Scotia, one game lands. Crazy. We did find 8 species that I say fall into that Goldilocks zone. They're just right for what we want to look at. In other words, they can carry the virus and they bite birds. Some mosquitoes only bite frogs, some only bite humans, so they specialize quite a bit, but there were 8 that carry the virus and do bite birds. But the clear winner, the clear bad guy this summer was this one, Culex restaurans. It is probably the most common species in the state, and it's the number 2 bad guy in terms of carrying the virus. So that was not good news for us. We did have it present in every trap site. I was hoping that we would find some barrier that, distance from water or something, but it was present in every trap site. In fact, about a quarter of our total captures were just this one species. West Nile virus came in. It was first detected by one of our samples in mid-July. So it did occur on the game lands, and we're waiting then to see what the latter summer brought us. Also did some larval sampling. And for the larval sampling, we don't have any data back, so all you're getting is my gut feel. But definitely what I was finding is that it's the stagnant ditches, stagnant pools, that's where we're getting the most mosquito larvae, not functioning wetlands, but stagnant water sites. The productive water sites for mosquitoes lack predators. So if we have a true wetland with a true wetland community, and I would take a scoop, there's one wiggler for mosquito, and then this guy, if I waited long enough, he'd probably eat that mosquito. So if you have dragonflies, if you have other predators, I was not finding a lot of wigglers. But in a situation like this, a little mud hole that I could step across would be producing boatloads of mosquitoes. And that was a real shock to me. We all have heard the DEP message about emptying your tires and emptying your containers, but I never really thought of these little sites acting like a tire or a container, but in becoming a real mosquito pothole. The key also in these sites, I tended to find more of the larvae on the edges where you had this shallow submerged vegetation. So even if there were predators, they probably couldn't get in there very well to get after the mosquitoes. So we're starting to get a search image for the areas that are really producing mosquitoes. This is one site. This was the worst site on Scotia. There's this trap. Down at the bottom of this site is a little mud hole, not very big. It was the most productive site that I found on the entire game lands. So when I would take a scoop, I would have 10, 20, 30 different wigglers in a 2-cup scoop from this one small puddle. A couple scoops would fill an entire sample vial. And this is what it would look like if you just walked up to it quietly without casting any shadow on the water. You can see them just laying on that water. So it's a relatively small site, but it's producing a heck of a lot of insects. So as far as our objectives, we did meet, what we were looking for. We did identify the mosquitoes that were involved, and we do have a pretty good suspect that the grouse cycle is probably going to point back to this individual. We did start to identify production areas, and we'll get that data back from DEP that will help us further refine that. And then I think we did pretty much, at this point, get a feeling that this DEP surveillance does reflect what's happening in grouse habitat. So this is 10 years of DEP data, and here's a date. And it's showing you how the West Nile cycle takes off. Usually it's a disease of July, August, and early September. And right here shows you when it showed up on the game lands. So it does fall within that DEP surveillance area. So I'm more confident about saying if DEP says it's a bad year, then we know it's probably going to be a bad year for grouse. So we're going to continue to refine that as we get their data. Of course, answers always bring up more questions. The big questions for me, seeing the situation with these small puddles, is direct control feasible? These are not wetland communities, they're stagnant water. So is it feasible or cost effective for us to control that water body and keep that production from coming off the water? Is it enough to make a difference for grouse? So that's a research question that I think we should continue to think about. The other one is, are there landscape barriers to West Nile? If we're working in an area with more topographic relief, we have more steep-sided, more higher ridges, then we may start to see that we can outbuild this mosquito up in the higher elevations. That's a question. And is there a genetic component to survival? There's a very interesting thing going on in my mind in the southeast, where we have a lot of survivors in the southeast part of the state where we know we have a lot of virus. And so I'd be interested in looking at the genetics of that. And then finally, are there other species involved in other regions of the state? So there are some unique species that live in the Northeast and the Northwest. I don't want to close the door too soon and say we got it nailed down. So there are continuing research questions. But you only do research, in my mind, to get to a management response. And so the management responses, I think we need to try to make progress on all 3 fronts if we're going to work with this situation. The first would be disease management. That's that question about, is control feasible or cost effective, or does it make a difference for grouse? And then habitat management. If we can identify locations where the disease risk is lower, that's where we should be putting habitat. So really trying to fine tune, not just work hard, but work smart in terms of where we put habitat. I think we really need to start focusing habitat where we already have these survivor populations. Where we have robust populations, we need to start building outward from those areas to give those birds good habitat to move into as they disperse. A particular focus, continued focus on best management practices for grouse, and I think really on brood habitat in particular. I think that's where we're falling short. And those broods are exposed to virus. So the more we can do to benefit broods, ideally the more survivors we'll get. And then finally, harvest management, just being prudent in that regard, with the goal really to increase these resistant birds as a proportion of the breeding population. We try to move those resistant survivors into our breeders the following spring. So that's where we are with our current thinking and what we were up to this summer, how I spent my summer. Are there any questions?
Any questions from the commissioners? Thank you. Very, very informative presentation. Steve Smith.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Executive Office. Just to follow up real quickly on Lisa's presentation, you may recall back, I believe it was at the January board meeting, where you saw a film we put together that talked about just what she was discussing, West Nile and its impact on the grouse populations. And that was something that Tracy Graziano, I'm sorry, I'm going to call you out, Tracy put together. She's a filmmaker in our bureau, and I think she did a terrific job with that project. And she's been continuing to work with Lisa on documenting the additional research that Lisa's doing. But that film was selected to be shown at 3 upcoming outdoor conservation film festivals. So we're greatly honored to have Tracy working with us. She's a very talented filmmaker, and she does a great job showing what the agency is doing out in the field. And the fact that she was recognized like that is something that she should be very proud of. So thank you, Tracy. We wanted to talk today about a project that we put together showing the young forest work that the Commission is doing. And I was thinking about the old saying, if a tree falls in the forest and no one sees it, did it really make a sound? Well, as the agency, we deal with a corollary to that, which is if a tree falls on a game land, to oversimplify habitat work, but nobody sees it, did it really happen? And for our hunters who don't see it, in their mind, it didn't really happen. So we've tried to make an emphasis recently of limiting the number of people who don't know what's happening out there on the game lands. Because if you look at all the time, all the effort that we put, all the resources into creating good wildlife habitat, if they're not aware of it, if they don't see it, or if they don't know what it's there for, it loses its value, at least to the public. The project that we're going to have Lori Mitchell she's a division chief from our media services division talk about, is just another part in that process of educating our public. What we were able to do is work with the regions and the bureau here in Harrisburg and put together a report. It's very similar to the annual report that we pass out every year to the legislature. And it takes a look at a particular project within each region. So we highlighted each region, showed the work that's happening there on the ground to impact wildlife, to create young forests. We have it back in the printer. We just got it back a week or so ago. We're going to be delivering copies to the legislature, to our hunters, to our partners, again, just so that they can see what's happening out there and where their license dollars is going to. So, Lori, take over to you to go through the report. As I said, Lori is in our media services division. She's a very talented communicator. However, she wanted me to stress that she's not a forester. And so if you have technical questions about some of the projects, we have some of the regions here. We'll try to get you an answer, but Lori can go through the substance of what we were able to put together. So thank you.
Thank you. So we kind of started out as a grouse report, and we changed our focus to the young forest habitat. As Steve said, it does kind of model the annual report, and I'm just going to take you through kind of like a talking table of contents. If you have content questions about biology or forestry or about the projects at the regional level, we'll have to address those with somebody else. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I will have to sneak out at about 12:35, so I'll hand the mic to somebody else at that point. There we go. So we start out with with a message from the executive director, his turkey hunting apparel. I have a nice table of contents. Here we touch base with the Game Commission's forestry program and what they're doing to produce and manage young forest habitat. Take a little bit of time to talk about state game lands comprehensive management plans. Each game land has one. Here we're talking about controlled burns and also aspen regeneration, both big components in the forest habitat management. And on these next 2 pages, we identify some of the key grouse habitat components. Managing for those doesn't just help the grouse, it also helps other species as well. So here's some information on how managing that habitat makes a difference. These 2 different bars that you see, the green bars, are the number of woodcock singing on lands managed by the Game Commission and partners. And the orange bars are the number of woodcock heard singing on sites that are kind of a generalized, the federal survey that they do. So it shows that what we do at the Game Commission does make a difference. Then there's an update on the West Nile situation with grouse. And then we get into projects on specific game lands in each region. So here we have a project in the Northwest on state game lands 130 in Mercer County. We'll talk a little bit about it there. There's some more information or there's a singing survey, woodcock singing ground survey there and there, just in that game lands. In the Southwest region, we are on state game lands 108 in Cambria and Blair counties. In the North Central region, we're on state game lands 100 in Central County, in the heart of the elk country. In the South Central region, we have 2 sites, I believe, 322 in Huntington County on state game lands. And then also Stone Valley Forest in Huntington County, and that's a hunter access project. So that's not actually on state game lands. State game lands 141 in Carter County, that's up in the northeast. We're doing some aerial burning. State game lands 211 in Schuylkill County, in the southeast. And then we kind of wrap up with some information on species of greatest conservation need. Several of the critters that are in the greatest conservation need in Pennsylvania that we've identified for that are benefiting from the project management for young forests. So we have some in the PDF version that you can get on the website. There are live links, not just to Tracy's film, but to some of the other films that we've done. Each time you see a little YouTube symbol, there's a couple of them at the beginning. There'll be live links out to those films on our YouTube channel. And that about wraps up the report. You guys can get hard copies. I believe they're waiting for you back at the office. I don't know if anybody has questions about design, but content folks, I'm really thinking help you too.
Thank you for giving us the quickest
Sorry.
report that we have seen in the last 4 years. A very important topic. Thank you. We appreciate it. Any questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The only discussion topic that I have is I've asked for a discussion on removing the requirement for a major permit in the Southeast Special Regulations area. And the reason behind that is that we find that to be a very important tool in managing the deer population in the Special Regulations area. And we want to try to open that up and make it a little bit easier for the hunter that's down there to try to manage the properties that they're on. Anyone have any questions?
No, but maybe we should bring, it's hard for people, I think, to understand the way deer management in that region works and why baiting is important. And I think, Brian, if you can, why don't you just touch on that a little bit, since that's where your area is and you're involved in hunting down there.
Sure. So, for those of you that haven't had the opportunity to get into an urban environment to hunt deer, what we find out really quickly is that we're not actually hunting deer. What we're doing is culling deer or managing the actual population of the deer in the area, because you can never get to where the population exists in most cases. So now we have to come up with a tool to bring those deer to an area that you do have permission. It's very difficult to get permission to hunt an urban area, as most of us that live in those areas have found out over the years. So we employ several tools, and one of the most important one is the opportunity, the ability to bait a deer from an area that's closed into an area where you have someone that's allowing you actually to do some hunting. And I always bring out the point, I brought Chris Rosenberry down and Brian Burhans down to actually take a look at some of the stand locations that we have. And one of them in particular is in the middle of a development. There's one house, he has one tree, and it's 15 feet off the front of his house. For years we hunted that property, and it's surrounded by other homes. We have permission from the other home, not allowed to hunt them, but we're allowed to hunt there. We got permission to create the safety zone that we needed. We killed 11 deer one year out of that stand, that one stand on that property. Shortly thereafter, we went through a period where baiting was not legal in the southeast special regulations area, and we didn't kill a single deer out of that stand. But we did have significant damage down in that area. You couldn't grow a plant. So this is what we're trying to do now, is to open it up into areas where we're looking to try to expand it a little bit, to try to get the population under control before we start to see the diseases that are spreading in the central part of the state try to move into the urbanized area, which would be a very, very bad thing for the white-tailed deer population. Yes.
So I understand the need to do this in these urban areas. I'm sure we're going to see in other urban areas as time goes on. What's the impediment right now to getting this permit, Brian? Is there a cost? Is it just people don't want to do it? I'm wondering what the impediment is.
Well, it's like owning a gun. I think some people don't want other people to know that they own a gun. And I think that's the same thing with the permit for baiting. People don't want to give up the location of where they're hunting because some of these locations are very good and very difficult to get. And the property owner does not want other people coming in. So what we're seeing is a resistance to the permit for that reason. They're not willing to give up the location that they're hunting.
I think the other thing that we need to do, though, as an agency, so we always talk about fair chase, like in Hunter Ed, whatever. But in these areas, it's really wildlife management, and it's kind of separate from hunting fair chase. This is more population control.
Absolutely.
And maybe it is a good idea to say, for reasons of special regulation areas, we've got a population problem.
Right.
We can't get good hunter access, and go ahead and do that.
And I think in the future, I think we'll see that issue in areas outside of just the special regulations area, in the more urbanized environment, similar to Allentown and Pittsburgh and Harrisburg, and the areas where the population continues to expand because the access isn't there. So we'll see the need for more progressive tools to get to the population management. Any other questions or comments?
So, aside from the baiting permit, are you looking at some kind of regulations as to how, are there regulations in place on how the bait is set?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so those will stay in place, none of that's going to change?
Right.
You
Currently,
have to use a feeder, it'll have to be on a timer?
Right.
Okay.
Right. We'd like to leave the regulations in effect as far as how to put the bait out. And the object is to get the deer used to coming into a specific time, and specifically during the day. If you just throw a 50-pound bag of corn and put it on the floor, or on the ground, the deer would come in and feed at night. You wouldn't see them during the day. It would just feed for the purpose. So yes, we want to continue that. Okay? At this time, we're going to end the meeting. This concludes our work session. I want to thank everyone for attending today, for taking the time to come out and talk to the commissioners. Our business meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at the Harrisburg headquarters, and it's a later meeting than typical. Starts at 1:30. At this point, we will need to clear out this room because we are holding an event for the staff in the room, and I want to thank everybody for coming.